we had done to put it in certain perspective. So I guess we have about 45 minutes time, and following that, we'll have some time for interaction, discussion, and taking forward other things. Yeah. So without wasting much of our time, I would kind of get into the matters. We titled it as Dried Fish Matters in Karnataka. So it does matter. Of course, there are issues around that. There are vulnerabilities around that, which we try to unfold through our last 2.5 years work. So, okay, so this is Karnataka. That's where we are showing. So our study broadly, we would try to cover 4 aspects that we did in part of this work. One, our tries with the secondary literature and data, both at all India level and in Karnataka level. Some will not get into the details of it, but some aspects of it which turn into some outcomes. That's what I'll be discussing. Followed by that, we had a very interesting partnership with Netfish, which resulted in a very interesting bilingual booklet, which we will be releasing soon. And I'll tell some salient feature of this database, because it's not a public data, but very interesting data, and how it concerns about the dried fish factors, particularly in relation to Karnataka. Though this data could be available for other coastal regions of India as well. And then I'll tell a little bit about the primary data that we collected, and it was quite a systematic sampling framework that we followed, and in 3 points of time over the year that we collected this data. And this data was collected in the middle of the COVID pandemic, which was in the first and second wave of it. And so there are challenges associated with that. So I'll provide a kind of process, how we went about collecting this data and the nature of the data. And followed by that, Prasanna will present some of the preliminary, very preliminary findings of this data, because organizing this data itself was quite a task. Following that, as Derek said, we did a supply chain analysis, and particularly the market mapping in Karnataka, and the report is would be soon out in the DFM site. But based on this work, Prasanna will present some of the details, some key findings of this particular market mapping exercise. Of course, the ebook that was mentioned, we also have a chapter which is broadly based on this value chain and market mapping exercise, where we did some work on weights and measurements. So that would be the 4th aspect of our presentation. And then Professor Bhatta would take us through the summary and future plans of Karnataka team. So the overarching aim of this project was to gain a better understanding of dried fish markets, and dried fish particularly, which is a scenario in Karnataka. When we proposed the scoping study, we were interested in explaining the supply and demand drivers of dried fish in Karnataka. And our initial understanding was that the literature was quite scanty, which later we reconfirmed that it's really scanty. And we limited our scope to the fish processors, traders, and we did not, our scope, the consumption part was out of our scope. We largely indirectly inferred about the consumption scenario, but we didn't get into the consumption study in this part of the scoping exercise. So soon after the project started, we actually scanned through the literature, and it was also supported by the larger work that Derek, Ben Melton and the team, they brought out, which is now published in Fish and Fisheries. Our own search for literature in Karnataka also told similar kind of story, that there is very little literature on dried fish situation in Karnataka. There is whatever literature that was available is largely discussing on technology and quality side of the study, and very little on social and economic aspect. There was hardly any estimation on how much dried fish is being produced in Karnataka. We didn't have this kind of data. So we tried looking for some sort of secondary sources of information. And prior to that, my personal own engagement in Fish for Food project helped a bit, where we were also trying to look at fish meal and fish oil, how it is playing a very serious role in altering and changing the fish utilization pattern. So that actually led us to little more exploring secondary literature and data. The two aspects that we will be focusing on here is to the All India database. That is what we looked at and what we got out of the analysis of that data. And second, a little bit about the Karnataka data that was available with us, and why we went to Netfish database later. So one of the important aspect that we figured out, at least hypothesized about it, looking at the fish meal, fish oil growth, and particularly this sector was growing rapidly, and Karnataka was or is one of the hubs of this factories. Particularly if you go to Mangalore, one of the places called Ullal, where you will find a concentration of about 15-16 factories. So this had already alarmed us about the changing utilization pattern of fish. And then later, we also realized that most of this fish meal goes to shrimp farms and shrimp feed. And that led us to hypothesize that whether there has been a long-term change, utilization shift that is happening, and how it is impacting dried fish segment. And for this, we tried many different ways to organize, find data, though our findings from different ways that we were doing were quite consistent, that dried fish segment is declining, and at the cost of increase in fish meal, fish oil production. But in most of these methods that we used, we had a very weak methodological explanation to and hence we kept trying with different kinds of database and methods and some kind of derivations. But finally, we settled down with a method using this FAO database. FAO's Global Fish Process Production Statistics database. That is what was quite an interesting database, which provided us data from 1976 to 2019. And we divided all the fish production into broadly 3 categories, which included dried fish, another is fresh and frozen fish, and third one is fish meal and fish oil. And we transformed this data into something called a compositional data, and basically using shares and proportions. And we also ran a couple of regression, logistic regression models, basically to look at some of these proportions and how they are being impacted by some important factors, particularly shrimp production. The results were quite robust. And if you kind of broadly look at this database, what you'll find is that there has been a kind of steady decline in dried fish production since early 2000. And in similar timeline, you see a steady, though small, but a steady increase in fish meal, fish oil production. And fresh fish production has been more or less, it's dwindling, but largely stagnant. So taking this data and using the log ratios, what we found is that both dried fish and fresh fish are affected by increase in fish meal, fish oil production. The regression results also showed the similar kind of results with appropriate statistical robustness. And we did this small exercise to understand what would happen if using a kind of a dynamic simulation model, what would happen if there is one standard deviation in the independent variable, what impact it would have on this one of these three segments of fish production. And what you see is that there has been a significant, or there is a significant increase in fish meal and fish oil at the cost of decline in dried fish production. So based on this, we wrote a paper. This paper underwent several revisions to finally settle on this format, and this paper is now being submitted to review in fish biology and fisheries. It is a invited, it's a special issues for which this paper was, we felt at least was appropriate, and we just submitted it a couple of days back. One of the key findings from this utilization shift is that there are three kinds of dispositions that we are seeing. One is that the change to fish, the transition to fish meal, fish oil, which goes to shrimp feed and then finally getting exported. 90% of the shrimp is getting exported. One is that it is happening at the cost of dried fish, and that has an impact on the food and nutrition security, because dried fish being utilized both in coastal areas as well as in hinterlands, and particularly among the vulnerable groups, as we'll show it later in the market mapping exercise, that a large number of plantation and tribal areas, the dried fish is an important part of food and nutrition. The second that we saw, or we are seemingly at least seeing that, is that the people, particularly women who are engaged in livelihood, engaged in dried fish processing and trading, their process of getting fish, adequate amount of fish is declining, and some of them are getting out of this particular enterprise activity. And that is also dwindling, and to an extent, it will also come out in our market mapping exercise. And of course, the requirement or the need from the fish meal, fish oil industry, which is in some sense is indiscriminate. They don't discriminate between any kind of fish, is leading to huge amount of trash fish collection by largely by the large-scale fishers, and that has ecological impact in the sea. Varieties of illegal methods of fishing practices being carried out, and of course, the fish meal going to shrimp farms, it would have also its own ecological repercussions, leading to salinity, ingress, etc. So these are the three important dispositions that we kind of position based on the utilization shift, which was evidenced from the data. Coming to the Karnataka part of the story, again, the data was a big problem, and for this, we also had a couple of students who joined us as intern to work on this particular issue. For Karnataka, we barely found any big data to make some kind of impression around dried fish or the fisheries sector in general. But what the overarching CMFRI, that is since every 5 years, the one census was conducted in 2010, next one was 2016. The data is a little difficult to gather because the data, they have not made it public, and one has to go through a hassle to get hold of some of this data. But what it is showing is that these are the three districts which form the coastal part of Karnataka. It's Dakshin Kannada, Udupi, and Uttar Kannada. Udupi was a carved out district from Dakshin Kannada itself. So for all practical purpose, you can put Dakshin Kannada and Udupi together and Uttar Kannada separately. And what we are seeing is that in Dakshin Kannada, there has been decline in fisher households during these two census. And there has been marginal increase in the other two places. It is not substantial, but marginal increase. But what is striking is that majority of these people are below poverty line. So they are identified as BPL households. So and that number is also increasing, which tells a story that the fishing communities in Karnataka are generally vulnerable. In highly urbanized and mechanized region of Dakshin Kannada, quite a few fisher households are moving out of fishing activities, and that is why the numbers are also declining. So this story is also kind of consistent with what is happening in if you look at the fishing fleet composition in Karnataka. You will see that Uttar Kannada, a majority of fishers are generally artisanal, and some of the small-scale fishers also use motorized boats. Whereas in Dakshin Kannada and Udupi region, you will find the substantially higher proportion of mechanized fleets, which constitute the large-scale fisheries. And motorized also is substantially high. The numbers or proportions are dwindling or changing over the three census period from 2005, 10, and 16. But overall, the overarching figures are that the Dakshin Kannada is and Udupi to an extent are highly mechanized, whereas Uttar Kannada still seems to be more artisanal and small scale. So this also gives a broader categories of fishers in terms of regional distribution within Karnataka. So the Karnataka study also, we made a paper out of it, basically looking at the poverty and vulnerability issues of fisheries sector, and some amount of analysis of price volatility and those factors. And our overarching finding is that small-scale fishers seem to be more vulnerable, and there are stresses around that. At the same time, there is not sufficient amount of data to engage further into to make reasonable hypothesis and test those. So CMFRI data is not publicly available, and it's a huge bureaucratic process to collect those data. And this actually led us to explore alternative data through NetFish. It is not that these things are happening sequentially. Certain things we found out earlier, and then we engaged with them. And but for the benefit of listeners, we are presenting it in a kind of sequential way. So a number of things happened beforehand, and and certain things were happening parallelly too. So you may have to keep that in mind. But the unavailability of data led us to looking at the NetFish database, and this was quite interesting. And thanks to Professor Bhatta and his already built network that we knew about this. And this NetFish is an organization called Network of Fish Quality Management and Sustainable Fishing, and it was basically an organization under MPEDA, Marine Product Export Development Authority. It was registered under the Society Act. The purpose of this was the tracing of origin tracing of fish, particularly for export purpose, and hence they thought that there is a need for having another organization which can find out from where this fish is coming from, and that was the purpose, and doing some quality checks, which is important again for export purpose, and that is why NetFish was created in MPEDA. But the interesting part of it is this organization is present across all the coastal states of India, and they have a director in each of this state, and there is a CEO who is in Cochin, and every landing site has an enumerator, and these enumerators are normally from local places, from local community, quite efficient, at least those whom we interacted in Karnataka. And they collect data on everyday basis from the major landing sites. So the nature of data that comes from them is a lot more reliable and more proximate than the estimates that is being done by other organizations like CMFRI or the fishery statistics that comes from ministry. So that is what led us to engage with them. And as part of the Azim Premji Foundation and Netfish, we went into a contract actually, and a part of the DFM project. And in that contract, we suggested that they would support us in data collection, primary data collection, and also share their Karnataka data with us, which we will jointly bring out some report or booklet. So that led us to getting the Netfish data, which was available in a disaggregated level. Major species-wise data was available, frequency was available almost on real time. And this data is still not publicly available. It is shared with us as part of the agreement that we have done. And between 2017 and 20, that means we have the data from, they started this data collection from 2017 onwards. So it's daily data, but we got monthly data with us and from each landing site and each harbor. So we made use of that data to find out what is happening in the fishery scenario based on this this database. And the left side, that the images that you are seeing are part of this the report or booklet that we are developing, trying to design it in a way that it would be attractive for somebody to look at. And the purpose is also to kind of share and make this data in some way public and let the fishers or in this region get to know about the data that they have been sharing. What is this data tells? And so the idea behind that is to share these reports with the fishing groups across the major landing sites and different associations of fishers, apart from sharing it with different sets of officials. Later, even some of my colleagues looking at this design of this report thought that it may be very useful also for children, for even educational purpose. That we'll figure out later, obviously. But the data shows some striking things. These are the 9 major landing sites, and for which we collected this data. What you could see is that Mangalore is the major harbor in Dakshin Kannada district. Malpe is a major harbor in Udupi district, and all other harbors are in Uttara Kannada district. So you can see that these highly mechanized harbors get substantial share of fish landing, whereas other harbors are relatively very small compared to this. But some of these, like Honavar, Gangoli, Karwar and Tadri, these are also becoming bigger. And as we engaged in the field, we saw that their growth, that is the number of trawlers and purseners, have been increasing. The fish landing also is increasing in recent times. And what we did, actually, we computed the top 20 species that is being collected from this major landing site. So what is interesting that is coming out of this database is the huge volatility of fish catch over the years. And the first one, that sardines or Indian oil sardine, you could see that 2017 it was pretty high, and then there has been a collapse of that. And one of the reasons for this collapse is also attributed to fish meal and fish oil demand. because Indian oil sardine, because of its oil content, is a pricey catch, and the fish meal industry looks forward to get oil sardine, and so that is one of the drivers. And what we have seen is that after 2017, there has been a collapse of sardine. Recently, we are hearing that there has been a revival, but the revival is not as much as it was prior to 2017. Second important thing that is coming out of it is the fifth most important species among all the species is trash fish. And this is, you will see that it's largely in the major harbors by big trawlers that has been, they are bringing a huge amount of trash fish. So, and that directly, in fact, goes to the fish meal, fish oil industry. So this has become evident and increased, and this is the only database perhaps shows these figures in this format. If you look at CMFRI database, the trash fish proportion would be much lower compared to what this net fish data is showing to us. And so this is for the booklet. We are trying to design it in a way that it looks nicer, and you can see that it's bilingual. So what is interesting that we took two sites, Malpe, one of the major harbors in Udupi district, and Amadali, which is a pretty small harbor in Uttara Kannada district. And the top 20 species characteristics, if you look at it, what you will find is that and they understand that this is the Amadali is largely having small scale fishes, motorized and artisanal fishes, and Malpe has mostly trawlers and purseners, the big large scale fishes, and what they are catching. So if you look at this fish species composition, what you find is that most of the species caught in this small harbors are largely pelagic species, which is near the shore and not too far away from that. Whereas in the big harbors with big large-scale fishes, we are finding most of demersals species being caught. So that's again a difference, that striking difference that we see from this database. So to summarize the findings from the netfish database, and the right side, that image you are seeing again would be part of the booklet with some nice designs. So this database shows that there has been a trash fish proportion has been increasing significantly, which is a concern, which is consistent with our finding that there is a utilization shift that is happening, and fish meal, fish oil industry is one of the major driver of it. And also we find that small harbors show relatively more landings of small pelagic fishes, which are also used for dried fish to a large extent. And large harbors get more of the demersal species. Okay, so with this background information, now we wanted to get into the primary data, because the secondary data availability can tell us some stories, but not necessarily much about what is happening to the exactly in dried fish scenario, what is happening to the people, what is their thought process. So varieties of questions that comes to our mind, we are not being able to address through this secondary work. Though some interesting outcomes came out of that, but that led us to look for primary data. And having but this secondary data, based on this netfish data analysis, we are bringing out this report. This is the design, and the content is ready. It has to go through a copy editing now, and once it is done, we are planning to we are organizing a workshop, consultative workshop in Mangalore on 16th July and in Karwar on 19th July, which will be participated by fishing communities, some of the officials of fishery department and government, and we're trying to tell them at least that how dried fish is not part of a scheme of thinking and how important it is. And in Mangaluru, we are planning to release this booklet. This booklet then would be kind kind of distributed across the landing site through the NetFish enumerators to different associations and organizations. So that's why we thought that this booklet must be bilingual. It's also, it helps us that this is the data that is being collected from the fishes. So it gives us a little bit of satisfaction that we also in turn give back something to them. They know about how much fish they caught. They don't know how much fish being caught elsewhere in their coast. And this database will tell them some kind of stories. And to make it interesting, we invested quite a bit on this design part of it so that people will open it and have a look at this the figures and data. So that's one of the outcomes coming out from this NetFish database, which is also supported by Azim Premji University. They were quite generous in giving some additional funding for bringing out this. And NetFish particularly providing this data was very helpful. So with this secondary data exploration, then we moved into designing a survey of dried fish producers. And the survey was conducted into 2020-21 in the middle of the first and second wave of the COVID pandemic. So quite a challenging time. But at the same time, we also thought that the data collection process should be largely consultative, democratic, so that we get to know something more or some interesting information around dried fish. And before this, whatever information that we had, particularly Professor Bhatta, myself, and Narayan from NetFish, we interacted several times and designed a primary first set of survey questionnaire. And then with that set of information in our hand, we went into a consultative mode. And one of the first consultation happened with the dried fish processors in Honavar, in Snehakunja Trust premise itself, where I called them, a number of them actually, who came, with whom we interacted and discussed and tried to find out what is their concern issues relating to dried fish, what are the species which are important species, and number of interesting insight and information that came from them. And that helped us to revisit the initial survey questionnaire that we had developed. Following this, actually, Professor Bhatta, myself, and Narayan, we went around several villages and met with a group of women and discussed about their situation on dried fish and what kind of dried fish they produce, which are important, which species are important, what kind of changes they have seen over a period of time. And those consultative process helped us to revise, refine, and develop the questionnaire, what we call as a draft questionnaire. And the collaboration with NetFish was useful because their enumerators were present in all the major landing sites all across Karnataka, and they are quite trained, and they also use TAB for data collection. They had collected other kinds of data from other organizations or for themselves beforehand. So they were quite trained in that sense. So it was useful for us that NetFish helped us in collecting this data. And for this, we thought it is better that instead of going for paper and pen survey, we should develop a questionnaire, which is online internet based, and we used Google Forms. Google Form is quite an interesting format to use because once the data that is fed in, it is available to us to see where how much data has been collected, where it is going slow, where it is going fast. So those concerns we can easily note and interact with the enumerators directly or inform them about it. So it also helps us in monitoring. That is one part of it. But the Google form also has its some limitations. So the limitations are that it has certain kind of pre-designs. So the questions are to be put in such a way that it conforms to the design. Though it was not a major problem for us for the kind of questions that we had in mind, but it may be difficult for somebody else who is looking at different sets of questions. But Google form by and large was very useful for us to make use of it. And we put this questionnaire in Google form, and then decided about how to go about this survey. We pretty clearly thought that it should be in three-phase survey because there is a peak season for fishing and there is a lean season and there is a ban period. So, and each of these period has implication on what happens to dried fish activities. So that's why we decided to capture that's data in three phases, in three seasons. So June and August was for phase 1, October, December was phase 2, and April, June was the phase 3. June and August is generally the ban period time. October, December is the peak period time, and April, June is a lean period of time of fish catch. And we kept this 3 round of survey, keeping that in mind. And since the enumerators are coming from 9 major harbors, so our data was also spread across around these 9 major harbors. And we decided to go with 30 response from each site. And 30 is a magical number. In somebody can say that that is where the T distribution kind of converges with jet distribution in statistics, they call it. So somewhat to get a normal distribution, you need 30. That's how this magical number of 30 was arrived at. And so from each harbor, we collected 30 responses. So 30 into 9 harbors is 270 respondents. And we revisited them 3 times. So that made about 810 observations. So we had designed this in consultation with Netfish and among ourselves, and even interacting with others. And after this, the questionnaire was ready. We had a training of the data collectors. The training emphasized on the nature of the questions because it was in English. It has to be translated into Kannada, how to ask this kind of questions in Kannada. And also 2 other important aspects of this questionnaire was that they had to be told about the ethical aspect of data collection. That was an important part, which we did. And also because it was COVID time, the following COVID protocols were also equally important. And so those are the 2 aspects we emphasize apart from training on the questionnaire itself. Also, I must mention here that this questionnaire, because it is part of Azim Premji University project, it also goes through IRB process, Institutional Review Board. So these were all submitted to IRB, and we had IRB approval for this before getting the survey. So these enumerators, they did a training, they filled the form interacting with each other, then they went for a pilot test. And some of the questions were rephrased and changed, some are dropped based on the pilot. And then the final data collection happened. And after every round of data collection was over, we had a consultative meeting with these enumerators and figure out if there are any kind of discrepancies. The good part of Google form is that you can, the data can directly be downloaded to Excel. Google itself shows some of the preliminary results and analysis, so which can be pretty intuitive and interesting. So the data inconsistencies were kind of taken care in this consultative meeting after every round of survey was completed. So based on this, some of the preliminary findings, now I'll hand it over to Prasanna to speak about the some of the very, very preliminary finding, because we had to put these 3 phases of data together. Putting this together, we had already kept in mind that we must use a particular code for each of the respondents. So, the enumerators were pretty clearly told that this code is very important for us, because that is what only factor which binds each survey round with the other. And we are not collecting names, etc. for because that kind of information, personal information. So with this, I'll hand it over to Prasanna to let us know about some of the preliminary finding and take us through the market mapping exercise later. Prasanna, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Can you see my screen? Hello.
Yeah, we see the female male slide, Prasanna.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
But if you put it on full screen mode, that would be great.
Prasanna, are you going to show yours PPT, or should I do
Mine.
Oh, so I should stop share then.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. In the next few slides, I would like to show some descriptive statistics of the survey respondents and their characteristics. First of all, the gender profile. As you can see from the slide here, an overwhelming percentage, that is about 95% of the sample were women. That means female dried fish processors. And this is pretty much consistent with the overall population of dried fish processors, who are basically women. Coming to the age distribution, we can see that about 65% of the respondents are between the age of 40 to 60, and about 12% are 60 to 69, and about 18% or so are from 30 to 39. So pretty much much of the dried fish processor sample was above the age of 40. Here is the description about the poverty levels in the among the respondents. In India, we have something called BPL, below poverty line, and the government distributes different kind of a ration card. That is the food distribution, public food distribution system, under the public food distribution system. And the type of ration card, that is whether they have below poverty line ration card or not, gives an idea about their poverty status. So among the respondents, an overwhelming, that is almost 95% of the respondents have the below poverty line ration card, BPL ration card. That means they are basically poor. Only a small fraction of them have above poverty line ration card. Coming to religion, about 95% of the respondents were Hindus. About 5% were rest of the 5% being Muslims and Christians. As you know, the Indian society, particularly the Hindu society, has something called caste, which is a social norm. And we have different castes, but for the purpose of administration, the government administration, we have made some aggregate categories. These are the general category, backward class, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and so on. These are the 4 major categories. And from this slide, you can see that over 60%, about 65% of the respondents were from the other backward class castes. and about 30% were from the general category, castes belonging to the general category, and some percentage, very negligible percentage, were from the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, which are basically the marginalized societies of the sections of the Indian society. Coming to the family history, that means since how long their family, the respondents' family, have been in the fishing or fish processing operations. As we can see, much of the sample respondents have been practicing. The families have been practicing since at least the parents' generation. The first generation fish processing, the processors are only about 20%, with the rest of the sample being more than one generation of experience in fishing and fish processing operations. And work experience, that means how long have been in dried fish operations particularly. We can see most of the respondents have 6 years or more of experience. Below 6 years of experience is about only 10%. Now let us see some of the perceived barriers that the processors feel that are affecting the demand for dried fish. We selected these barriers, and we asked the processors how do they perceive these barriers to be. How strong is this barrier? They have to rate it on a Likert scale. For example, not a barrier, a low barrier, a medium barrier, high barrier, and a very high barrier. And we can see that some of the most important barriers, that means the black colored pillars on the slide, we can see that taller pillars we can see for price and shelf life and taste and so on. So the processors feel that these factors are some of the barriers to the demand for dried fish. This slide shows some of the most commonly used fish for drying purposes by harbor. Each color on this slide represents one species or one group of fish, and the length of the pillar shows the number of respondents who have chosen that particular fish for drying by harbor. For example, you can see in the Belekeri harbor, all 30 respondents said that the fish option 1 for drying was mackerel. Similarly, we can see that there are many long pillars, tall pillars of mackerel, and the greenish one for anchovies. So there are many tall pillars for blue and light green, that is anchovies and mackerel. That means these two are some of the most popular fish groupings that are used by the processors across the different fishing harbors. Now, next for the next 3 slides, we will discuss, we will show some of the results with respect to the COVID-19 impacts. We asked the processors, compared to the non-COVID times, what is the status of availability of fresh fish for the processing of dried fish. And they had a Likert scale type of options. That is, the availability has decreased slightly, the availability has decreased substantially, there has been no change in availability, and there is some increase in the availability, and there is an increase, substantial increase in availability. And there is also an option to say whether if they do not know or cannot say. And from this slide, we can see that an overwhelming percentage, that is about 65% of the respondents, feel that the fresh fish availability during COVID-19 period decreased compared to the non-COVID times. Only very few are of the opinion that there has been an increase in the supply of or the availability of fresh fish for the preparation of dried fish. This is a similar question regarding COVID-19, but this is about the demand for dried fish during COVID-19 compared to non-COVID times. So here we can clearly see that much of the respondents feel that there is a slight there is an increase in dried fish demand during COVID-19 times, but we can also see that there are also some who feel that there could be some decrease in demand, and also there are many respondents who felt there could be no change in the demand. But this becomes the situation becomes more clear when we see the demand for fresh fish during COVID-19 compared to non-COVID-19 time periods. We can clearly see that there is no doubt in the minds of the processors that the demand for fresh fish has definitely increased during COVID-19 compared to the non-COVID time periods. So what we have done, achieved with the survey of processors is that we have brought out a report on the scoping study, which has been already submitted to the DFM. And this report contains all the survey questionnaires and the process that went into the preparation of the questionnaires that Dr. Jyotishi just explained before this. And we are also planning to come up with an academic paper based on the analysis of the panel data. That means the 3 rounds of the survey. So next, we will look into the second step of the primary data collection. That is the mapping the supply chain of dried fish products in Karnataka. So this is the goals and objectives of this particular exercise. We particularly want to see the linkage between production and distribution channels of dried fish supply chain in Karnataka, and to map the network of activities and the actors involved. Through this, we will see the continuity and changes over time in the functioning of the dried fish markets in Karnataka. And then we will try to understand the key actors that are involved in the supply chain and the linkages among them, and to analyze the structure, conduct, and performance characteristics of dried fish markets of Karnataka. So as you may know, the terms structure, conduct, and performance have specific meaning in economics. For example, the structure means the number of actors. That means the number of firms or the number of processors that are existing in the market, and the type of entry barriers or the exit barriers that exist in the market. Conduct means how do the players or the firms conduct themselves in terms of pricing and other parameters. And the performance is basically how the welfare, how the structure and conduct affect the nature of welfare, the effect on the welfare of the economic welfare of the society. This is not only about the consumers, but it also includes the producers' welfare. So we followed the following methodology. Basically, we conducted semi-structured interviews with the dried fish producers, wholesalers, and retailers. We collected qualitative and quantitative information, and the market we selected and the actors we selected were to track the vertical and horizontal flow of dried fish products. By vertical flow, we mean the flow from the producers to wholesalers and next to the retailers. By horizontal, we mean from coastal markets, that is the production centers, to the hinterland markets, that is the consumption markets. These coastal markets, we have to keep in mind, that they are populous enough to be consumer centers by themselves. That means they are both production centers as well as consumer centers. So using this data, we performed some descriptive analysis using graphs and tabulations. These are the markets that we selected. On this, you can see the spatial map of Karnataka, and the round or these red circles, they denote the coastal markets, and the red triangles, they denote the hinterland markets, and the blue solid line along the western periphery, it shows the coastline of Karnataka, and the different colors of the districts. The districts have been colored in different colors to show the distinct locations. So this is the supply chain map of dried fish market in Karnataka. Basically, the activity starts from the landing centers. Then the linkage, the forward linkage with the dried fish processors. Then it is linked with the dried fish wholesale market, then to the retailers, and then to the final consumers. Coming to the landing centers, from the literature, we come to know that as the Karnataka fisheries has gotten more mechanized, small scale operators, that means like dried fish processors, have been finding it increasingly difficult to get fish directly from the landing centers due to the competition from large buyers. That means, for example, export oriented firms send their own buyers directly to the landing centers, and these small scale processors cannot really compete with these large scale buyers in terms of price. So they have the small scale processors, that is dried fish processors, have become more dependent on commission agents and auctions for their fish supply. That means this has elongated the supply chain of dried fish in the state, which means there is a increased cost associated also. Instead of so they have to pay the commission to the commission agent, which will be transmitted on to the consumer. So so basically the price of the dried fish has increased because of the mechanization of the fishing sector. The Karnataka state receives dried fish from other states, mainly from a state named Gujarat on the western northwest corner of India, and also dried fish wholesale market of Karnataka, particularly Mangalore. Many other states, for example, Kerala mainly, and Tamil Nadu, dried fish goes out to those states. Retailers are also a key link in this chain, but dried fish processors themselves can also act as retailers and sell directly to the consumers. And there is also a small portion of the produced dried fish that goes to the production of fish meal, especially when the product is spoiled or is of lower quality. The processors want to sell it to the fish meal companies or to produce manure or fish meal. So the market is characterized by fewer wholesalers, that is fewer buyers, but many processors. That means many suppliers. In economics, this kind of a situation is called oligopoly. But in Karnataka's dried fish market, we have not been able to ascertain whether this kind of a asymmetric distribution of wholesalers and processors has resulted in the abuse of such a power by the buyers. That means whether the buyers form a cabal or group together to distort the prices. In this study, we have not been able to analyze those kind of issues. What we have observed from the interviews with the dried fish processors is that over the last 10 to 15 years, there is a fairly substantial decrease in the number of processors. Wholesale market in dried fish markets of Karnataka appears to be the pivotal market. That is where the prices are determined. Mangaluru is by far the largest market. It has a dedicated wholesale market and also a dedicated retail market exclusively for dried fish. The Mangaluru market receives dried fish products from all over the Karnataka coast, as well as from other states of India, especially Gujarat and Lakshadweep. Most buyers from hinterland markets of Karnataka depend on the Mangaluru wholesale market. This particular market plays a critical role in the flow of information and goods. For example, Mangaluru processors based in Mangaluru approach the processors, wholesalers to get suggestions about what kind of fish to process in the next batch, what could be the price, and where is the demand coming from, etc. Such kind of information is transmitted by the processors, by the wholesalers to the processors. So this helps in the flow of information across the supply chain. So this is probably why the wholesale market is the pivotal market in the dried fish supply chain. Now, this section, we will see some photographs interspersed with the slides. This is the dried fish processing activity at a place called Hoige Bazaar. Hoige literally means sand in Kannada or Tulu in Mangaluru. This is the dedicated wholesale market that is very close to the town center in Mangaluru. We can see different kinds of shops. One shop is exclusively for locally dried products, and many shops take products from local markets, local producers, as well as products coming from other states. For example, on the right bottom, you can see tuna, dried smoked tuna coming from Lakshadweep to Mangaluru market, which is called masmeat in the local language. This is the dried fish retail market in Mangaluru. This market is also very close to the town center of Mangaluru. And both wholesale market and retail market are were built by the government and handed over to the fisher community. Here you can see packaged dried fish that are being sold on the aisles, in the aisles of a supermarket in Mangaluru. What we observe from the market surveys is that informal transactions are more important in the operations of the dried fish supply chain. For example, traders and processors involved in trade credits and cash transactions rather than formal negotiations. Repayment of credit usually happens during the subsequent rounds of transactions. Therefore, trustworthiness and reliability are more important for the successful transactions. There is no formal letters of credit or no involvement of the bank accounts or credit cards and so on. There is some collective action both at the processor level and the wholesaler level, but there needs to be more improvement in the collective action. Here are some women laborers at a place called Malpe in Udupi who are moving fresh fish from the harbor to the drying yard close by. This is again the drying yard in Malpe in Udupi. So even from the pictures and the dried fish processor survey, you can probably guess that there is a gendered dimension to the dried fish market. Particularly, processing of dried fish is carried out mostly by women. Wholesaling activity is mostly by men, but women are also there substantially in the retailing activities. Religion, caste, and geographic origin are still important determinants of what roles the actors play in the value chain. For example, processors are from traditional Hindu fishing castes, but wholesalers are Muslims and they are men. Laborers are migrants from hinterland Karnataka, which probably implies that these are non-fisher communities. So they have some kind of an informal barrier to entry into the processing or retailing activities. But there is also one prominent Tamil, a woman processor of Tamil origin. Tamil is a language spoken by in another state of Karnataka. That particular woman in Mangaluru has also established from non-fisher background, has established herself as a prominent processor in Mangaluru. So the informal barriers may not be as strong in Karnataka. From the market survey, we came to know that major consumer groups in Karnataka include many vulnerable sections, such as tribal people in the southern borders districts of Karnataka, such as Mysore and Chamarajanagar. There are many tribal belts where dried fish is in much demand. There are also many migrant laborers in distant hinterland areas who work in coffee and tea estates of Karnataka. And these migrant laborers also use dried fish products extensively. And there are many backward castes throughout hinterland and coastal areas who use dried fish products in their diet regularly.
Prasanna, you may speed up a little bit.
Yeah. So these are some pictures from the place called Karwar in Uttara Kannada. Uttara Kannada is mainly a small scale operations based. We can see mostly small scale operations. A fisherwoman carrying retailing for dried fish for retailing, and we can see that this particular retailer is using a traditional measuring cup. The big cup in her hand is called a kolaga, which is a traditional measuring cup used very much in the dried fish retailing. This is again another picture from Karwar. We can see we could see from the market survey that there are very limited types of products, and the number of species that go into processing has come down mainly due to lack of availability for drying. They go for some other purpose, such as freezing and other fresh products, but not for dried fish in recent years. Drying, there is no fermented fish products, which are usually grouped with the dried and cured fish products in Karnataka. There is only drying after initial salting, drying without salting, and salted wet fish without drying. And there are quality standards established by the Government of India through the Bureau of Indian Standards, but there is severe scarcity of land and other constraints that prevent the processors from adhering to the quality standards. From the next slide, these are some pictures from the hinterland markets of Karnataka. You can see a woman selling dried fish on a push cart. So these are some of the major challenges for dried fish sector. Mainly, processors have been exiting from the business, and the current cohort of processors is aging, and younger generation of local fisher communities are not interested to take up the dried fish business. So it could be that migrants are the future of dried fish market, especially processing in Karnataka. So there is also a factor that demand for dried fish is decreasing. From the surveys, it is particularly prominent or strong in the hinterland markets because of strong competition from fresh fish and fresh meat, that is fresh chicken mostly, even in rural areas of Karnataka. So there is also policy apathy, that means negligence by the policymakers. Especially, there has been no budgetary allocations or policy interventions to encourage the dried fish segment. This is evident from acute shortage of drying land in major harbors. In fact, most of the processors are anxious that they will lose the drying yard because of some commercial activities or some other economic development. There is also a lot of shortage of clean water facilities at the drying yards. One very peculiar observation from the dried fish market is that despite rapid modernization of the retailing sector in general in Karnataka and in India, the dried fish segment is characterized by the prevalence of traditional weights and measures. So the retailers and wholesalers use different non-standardized measurements. For example, heaps, counts, bundles, and traditional measuring cups to sell the products. This is a large cup called kolaga, which is we can see it is overflowing with the dried anchovies. This is a traditional cup called seru, which is overflowing with the shrimp, dried shrimp. This is dried mackerels. These are sold by the count, and these are dried Bombay duck, a fish called Bombay duck. These are sold in bundles, and these are some of the specific outcomes. We have produced a report on market mapping to the DFM, and this will be transformed into an academic paper. And we have also submitted a report on traditional weights and measures for publishing as part of an ebook. With that, I hand over to Dr. Bhatta to summarize and talk about the future plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasanna, for. Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Maybe next slide, you can continue. Yeah. As it was mentioned earlier, there were no previous studies on the dried fish. In fact, I myself, around 20 years back, we did some work on dried fish, but other than that, there were not many publications or reports on. It was as part of the DFID, that is Department for International Development of the UK. Ours are some of the first studies. Dried fish makes non-trivial contributions in Karnataka, especially in terms of the employment generation as well as the consumer profile. It reaches the very remote parts of the hilly regions of Karnataka, and also it provides huge employment for in the coastal for women. Policy apathy towards the dried fish segment of India's seafood sector. That is one of the major problem is the shrinking space in the coastal areas, and also in almost all the new policies announced by the government of India and the respective state governments, the dry fish is missing. For example, in 2020, this Matsya Sampada scheme of 20,000 crores of rupees was announced, but there was no mention about dried fish sector at all. The dried fish segment appears to be in a transition period, needs a lot of support, especially the space required for fish drying in the absence of any viable new technologies is one of the major constraints, and also the good quality water. Training of new generations of dried fish processors, again, collectivization is one of the major, one of the requirements. Of course, Government of India also provides a lot of support, support for the establishment of the producer organization, new form of producer organizations. But the problem with these producer organizations is each producer group produces a different quality, different product type, and then they are not willing to join these producer organizations because of the hesitation that their product might lose its unique features. So there is a need to provide improved facilities for more affordable fish processing technologies such as dry curing fish, because solar dryers were not so much suitable, especially for drying of different types of fishes, because each fish has a different moisture level. It needs a different moisture levels to be retained. So that kind of a adjustable technology is yet to come up in the solar dryers. Next, yeah. So what we plan to do in the next phase is consumption of dried fish. What type of fish, what quality, which particular fish is required, is consumed in which part of the state and even in outside the state. Factors affecting the demand. What are the demand attributes? What are the product attributes? Which product attribute attracts higher price? Interstate trade. In Prasanna and Amalendu mentioned about the interstate trade, but must be knowing that Mangalore has been a very prominent terminal market. Even the fish from Maharashtra, Gujarat, and all those states come to Mangalore. From Mangalore, it goes to northeastern states like Assam, Nagaland, and many other places. From there, again, it goes to Bhutan and other countries as well. So, interstate trade of dried fish is a very important aspect in Mangalore. The dried fish markets of Karnataka is declining or consolidating. It is very difficult to say at this stage, but definitely it is not declining. One woman, when we were doing some field work, said that the demand for dried fish in monsoon period is double the demand of the other non-monsoon period. That means during the monsoon period, the fishing is stopped, but then the demand would increase double. But that doesn't mean that the other seasons, the demand would be declining. It remains the same in spite of the fact that the fresh fish is available. That means the consumers prefer dry fish not as a substitute for fresh fish, but definitely for its own unique taste and preferences. Dried fish production for subsistence, especially in Uttara Kannada district, the quality of the dry fish of Uttara Kannada is much far better than the quality of dry fish in Udupi or Dakshina Kannada district, where the quality of water is relatively poor. And also the type of fish available in Uttara Kannada is definitely far better than that of the industrial regions of Dakshina Kannada district. So there is a lot of scope for improving the subsistence women groups by consolidating through collective action and provide them additional support for producing high quality dried fish. Labor profile and work environment in the dry fish production markets. So this is another important area where we need to show it to the governments that dry fish production is most sustainable, ecologically sustainable, and it could provide a lot of employment also, so that the importance of dry fish in the policy matters at the planning level is improved. Next. So we have already have a couple of meetings regarding the dry fish producer organization, especially in Uttara Kannada district, Honavar, Bhatkal, and Ankola. These three taluks together are willing to form one producer organization, but a lot of basic work is required to be there. And then booklet on Karnataka marine fisheries production is another important publication that we want to bring out. And then 2 consultative workshops, Mangalore and Karwar, they are already planned. We are going to have one on July 16th and July 19th in Karwar. Next. Yeah. Thanks to SSHRC Canada, University of Manitoba, DFM, Netfish Karnataka, participants in the market studies, and audience. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. The presentation is finished.
Well, thank you to the members of the Karnataka team for that very comprehensive presentation. You've done an enormous amount of work, and I think it's a real model for the rest of the DFM project. Prasanna, you could stop sharing your screen now, please.
Yeah.
So everyone in the audience, I realize we're at the pretty much the end of the appointed time. But I'm willing to extend for another 10 minutes for anyone who has questions to ask, if that's okay with the Karnataka team, if you're able to stay for another 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, good then. So yes, for those who are able to stay, the floor is open for questions on what you've just heard.
Well, maybe I could ask a question about the implications of the poverty line measures that were mentioned a couple of times in your presentation. I'm wondering, I mean, I'm not being too familiar with the situation, and there seem to me a couple of ways that we could read that. One being that, people are trying to sell dried fish, but aren't earning, sufficient incomes to survive. At a poverty line level. The alternative being that they are producing enough to subsist, but it's all subsistence level and therefore sort of not documented income. But I mean, I'm not too familiar with the way the measurement of the poverty line in India. So perhaps if you could tell us a little bit more about sort of what is going on there, because it seems to me that could have significant implications for people's desire to stay with fish processing, whether it's actually a viable way of surviving really, or meeting a subsistence level.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting question, Eric. Thanks for this. I can have two views around that, but maybe Prasanna Bhatta can add later. One is that, the nature of data that is being collected and by CMFRI and how the classification of BPL, APL is happening, whether it is a true measure of poverty or not, that is something questionable in some ways. So there is data quality is a problem. That is one part of it. But what we actually also observed these are intuitive observations that we saw, is that there is a dichotomy that is happening between price and quantity. The quantity is declining, and the prices are not increasing proportionately. And even if it increases proportionately for the consumer, the fishers are not able to appropriate part of it. So the decline quantity and not able to get sufficient price realization for that is a situation for kind of pushing them back to subsistence or through the poverty level. And that is reflected in terms of people moving out of fishing activities, which is quite evidently being seen in the more industrialized districts like Uttar Kannada, in Dakshin Kannada and Udupi. So that is the second aspect of it. The third aspect of it, that the whole process of industrialization of fishing, that is the trawlers and purseaners, there is a concentration that is happening, which may be leading to inequality. And it's a conjecture again, but and a lot of the fishers who were entrepreneur otherwise have become fish workers. So from entrepreneur to the transition that has been happening to as laborers. And that transition is pretty much evidently being seen both among men and women who are working as wage laborer in the trawlers or in the harbor areas.
Yeah, I can add one more point. We looked at the cost and returns of the dry fish processing of some of the species, and we find that they are not earning even 8 to 10% net revenue. And one of the problem is the working capital. Since they need the coastal land for drying and all that, the land ownership with the port authorities, and they are not getting any bank or any institutional finance. All their finance is coming from the informal sector, and they keep paying a very high interest for the loan that they borrow. And we looked at this problem, and then the banks were we tried to convince the banks, but then what the bank says is, look, we want the land to be owned by the dry fish processors, but the land cannot be given to them because the port authorities, they own the land. So there are so many institutional systems which prevent dry fish processors from accessing cheaper credit, accessing cheaper technology. it's so hard, I mean, very, very hard work.
I was quite struck by the point you made that there's a decline in engagement in the mechanized sector in Dakshin Kannada, which suggests to me that actually the movement out of the fishery is by those who have the means to move out of the fishery, and that those who are below the poverty line are in fact stuck in involvement. So I think it might be worth thinking further about that, whether this hypothesis that I've just made based on that statement you made earlier in the presentation is actually correct. If so, then these structural factors that Professor Bhatta is talking about could become quite important in understanding how poverty constrains people's choices, basically. So I don't know if you have any reflections on that and whether you think that's a correct observation or not.
Even in Dakshina Kannada and Udupi district, where the maximum 70 to 80% of the fish production comes from the mechanized sector, in terms of number, it is the number of small scale fishermen are larger than that of the industrial fishing fleet. So the decline in the number of fishermen in these two districts is by the small scale fishery sector. So it is not from the industrial sector.
Okay, but your early figures show that there was a substantial decline in I guess industrial fishing vessels or mechanized fishing vessels from Dakshin Kannada, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, that is one thing is the number has slightly come down, but capacity, the fishing intensity has increased.
Yeah.
Each fishing boat now with 120 to 130 HP engines 5 years back, now they are going with 500 HP engines. So although the number seems to have declined, the fishing capacity has increased there.
Which does suggest a concentration of the mechanized sector, which again could, as you're arguing, can have a substantial impact on the small scale processors because it makes it more difficult for them to access the material.
Yeah.
But again, I had the impression from your presentation that the number of small scale processors is not necessarily being affected. They're just having to struggle harder to make a livelihood.
Exactly. Yeah.
This fish meal sector comes as another big decoy in this whole process.
Yes, because the increased concentration, then one of the targets for their sales is fish meal, FMMO. Other questions from the group? Abhilasha?
Yes, so I have a question regarding fish meal, the drivers of from Netfish and Empira data. Is it like all driven by the export driven industry, like shrimp, etc., or there is a good proportion of what is being traded domestically as well for some fish which is domestically consumed? So do we have some insight on that? Is it a gap now?
Were you able to follow the question, Amal or Professor Bhatta?
No. I think her voice is breaking, right? Or it was only for me?
No, it's for me also.
Yeah.
No, I think my internet is unstable, so I'll just repeat it. So most of the FMFO is driven by exports only, or is it because the study has taken the data from Netfish? Does domestic trade has any impact on the fish meal production, etc.? And how does that factor into then dried fish? Do we have data on that as well?
No, the Netfish data is essentially on the fish landing. And from there, what we are getting actually is the increasing size of trash fish. That is the fifth largest in last 4 years, what has been increasing. So, and we know for that this trash fish goes to fish meal, fish oil companies. And the fish meal, fish oil is again a little more complicated chain. Almost 80% of the fish meal, fish oil is consumed domestically. It goes to shrimp farms, largely in Kakinada, the Godavari Delta, the shrimp farm area, the venomized shrimp area. 20% of the fish meal, fish oil is exported. It is exported to different countries for animal feed and or salmon feed, etc.
Yeah, some of the CMFRI publications also state that these mechanized fishing, especially Mangalore and Malpe, 40 to 45% of the total catch consists of these trash fish. Okay, that indicates how ecologically destructive these high capacity mechanized boats they bring. So 40% of the total. In fact, there are some mechanized boats which go for fishing of only trash fish. The type of net they use brings only the trash fish and directly supplied to the fish meal companies. Yeah.
Thank you. Aklima?
Yes. So my curiosity is a little bit different. So I can see women are like closely working and engaging themselves with the dried fish. So have you get to observe like what helps women to engage themselves with the dried fish sector?
One thing is to go for collective efforts, by organizing them into some kind of a producer cooperatives, enable them to access cheaper credit, better technology, better infrastructure. I would say better infrastructure in terms of proper drying yard, proper water supply, proper drainage facilities, storage facilities. So those things are provided through these producer cooperatives. And then still these producer groups are able to maintain their own uniqueness of their own products. And if that product could be sold as a separate, not in a homogenized manner, then such a system would really help these women groups to realize a higher price.
I think Aklima's question is slightly different, I guess. So you wanted to know what is keeping them motivated to be in that profession itself, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So it's very difficult for us to kind of ascertain some of those things, but with some of the interviews that we had, the one is that the control on the money and the decision-making process and the sense of empowerment also is there with that. The dried fish activities, the money earned also, in some sense, they feel they own it. And so that is one of the factors. And the other is obviously that that is what they know. So that is kind of keep them going because this is what they know best. But some of the, we saw different types of activities among those women group. Some who would sell fresh fish and the remaining they will bring it back to dry it, and then the dried fish should be sold differently. Some specialize only on dried fish, and some who do only marketing activity and not necessarily processing. So they buy it from these processors and take it to some of the remote hinterland area to the villages and sell it there. Of course, they look for some of those big weekly markets like Karwar Sunday Bazaar is quite a famous market, and Ambadali's Tuesday market is quite a big market. So they organize themselves, procure these things to look forward to this particular type of market. I think a combination of these factors are playing a role in, and they have been quite enterprising that even if the local procurement has been declining, they have been going through the agents to find fish coming from other places, which they are processing and drying. So, so there is an entrepreneurial gene also that is there to sustain them in this activity.
Thank you.
May I?
Please.
We have proposed a fresh kind of hypothesis in our report. that in the market mapping report, especially in Dakshina Kannada and Udupi districts. The traditional fisher families, fisher communities or castes, they used to follow a matrilineal heritage system. That means mother's assets will mostly go to the daughters, not to the male children. So it could be that traditionally this has been passed down through generations to the current generation. That could be one factor. And also
That's
from
very
the
interesting.
yeah, that's just a hypothesis. It could be or it could not be. And also from the descriptive statistics that we presented,
Okay.
you can say
Thank
many
you.
are from many have been from doing this fish drying activities since generations. So it could be just a heritage.
Klima, though, the explanations that the Karnataka team is providing are a little bit different, I think, than what you're finding in TECNAF. In TECNAF, my understanding from my conversations with you is that the women who are involved in dried fish processing tend to be women who are particularly socially vulnerable. They're widows or they're women, they're refugees. This is not a profession of choice for them. It's a profession of necessity. Whereas in
Yes.
Karnataka, I'm getting the impression that, this matrilineal, multi-generational engagement suggests a different kind of social status for women. So at a project level, that's quite an interesting comparison.
But here it also remains, they can choose their profession, like they have options too. Like they maybe want to work as a maid to another house, or can work in the processing sites, but they choose to work in the processing sites because they do not want to be recognized as maid. So
well, I don't know, based on the Karnataka team's presentation, though, it may not be as open as that. I mean, it still sounds to me like, this conversation we just had with Professor Bhatta about the structural factors that are, driving poverty. There's still a kind of stuckness to this profession. So I think this is something that the Karnataka team may want to engage with more in the next phase.
okay.
Yeah, I think, and this switching between, this is enterprise, right? When you get into doing this activity, you are taking risk to do the enterprise of dried fish trading or processing and trading. Whereas the other alternatives may be as wage labor. So being an entrepreneur versus being a laborer, this choice is a very, very stark different choices. So yeah, it's something that we have to also look at, those who are getting out of this profession or getting into this profession or sticking to this profession.
Look, I think this is a nice place to end, where we're moving from the Karnataka example to broader level project comparisons, because that's exactly where we do want to go in the second phase of the project. So I'd like to really congratulate the Karnataka team on some very careful and thorough research in Karnataka, and I'm very much looking forward to the Karnataka team continuing to do the work in the second phase, and to more conversations like this at DFM. And so I'm hoping that after, in September, October, we'll be able to have another couple of presentations of this sort. I'm hoping Delanti, if you're still with us, looks like she might have left, but I'm hoping that, oh no, you are there, Delanti. I'm hoping Delanti might give a similar presentation for Sri Lanka, and then we may get one from Tara for Gujarat as well. Okay, so thanks very much, and thanks to all of you in Asia who stayed up late, and particularly the Karnataka team, and look forward to interacting with all of you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Derek, for this opportunity.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone. Thank you.